Well, hello everyone. This is Data Driven Chat, and today I'm really pleased to finally have Deborah Webster, with whom we were supposed to meet ages ago, but I only just got around to it. So Deborah is a creator of AMANIcircle, Better Companies for Better Future. I hope I got this right. She also told me she's a troublemaker, but she's going to elaborate on that. Hi, Deborah. It's great to have you with us today.
Hi, great. Thank you for having me.
So basically the way we normally do the data-driven chat is we talk about career, and you have a very unique career, I think, because you do responsible leadership for a living, which is really cool, I think, and not many people do that. So can you maybe elaborate what is responsible leadership and how it is related to ethics of AI and things that people can currently kind of study in the university or learn in various workshops?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I find it crazy that I even have to call it responsible leadership, because leadership is supposed to be about ethics, about responsibility, and more in alignment with stewardship. But unfortunately, we have created a world where a lot of the people that we refer to as leaders are actually not leaders. They're people in positions of power. So having a title doesn't actually make you a leader. And I've been observing this. When I came up with this a while ago, I also came up with something called personal governance, because I was working in corporate governance and family governance. And I was thinking, it's like you're only as good as your weakest link. So it's about, if you don't have personal responsibility, personal governance, then you can't actually have solid corporate governance or family governance. By means of background, I kind of fell into psychology and business studies at university. I started out my life in marketing. By accident, I got into recruiting. And the reason I say by accident, I was working for a startup and I caught the founders embezzling funds. And at the same time, they weren't paying people, but they were making these empty promises of, we'll pay you soon, we'll pay you soon, we'll pay you soon. And I could see that there was absolutely nothing that was going to happen that would make that true. So I had the option of leaving the company, and that if I did that, it would have been a signal to everyone else that there was trouble, and they would leave, and hence we wouldn't have a product to sell to get the money. If I stayed, I was lulling them into a false sense of security. So I had to create option C, which was contacting all the recruiting companies and starting to find roles for these people so they didn't fall through the cracks. It's a lot easier to find a role if you have a role. And along the way, I got picked up as a recruiter. Later on, I moved back to the Middle East. I was working for a small boutique company, and then I was headhunted by Korn Ferry, who are one of the world's leading companies in the leadership space. And I was made a partner in the Middle East within 2 years. Mm-hmm. And along the way, I found this pattern. So there was this narrative at the time that was saying there was this war for talent. In my experience, that wasn't actually true. The biggest problem I had was finding awesome companies that deserve awesome people. And I was moving people halfway across the world, which has its own challenges. We can unpack that later if you wish. And so I started asking the questions like, so what is this pattern? What's this? And then when I left, I had a bit of an intervention by some of my old clients, and they're the ones that challenged me to reverse engineer the methodology, look through all the data, and develop Amani, which is the actual system and the protocol underlying everything else. So that's a long story to what responsible leadership is, but it's about having the courage to do the right thing. And our systems and the way markets are set up don't necessarily encourage people to do the right thing. We can unpack that if you wish.
So yeah, I mean, the next question I was going to ask you was about how what was your personal journey into responsible leadership? So how did you get to it? But I think you partially addressed that already. So I guess I could maybe ask some kind of a clarification question about that in terms of, so you said you started in marketing, which I think is quite distant from responsible leadership and ethics in terms of field. But can you maybe unpack how exactly does this transition happens? Yeah. Kind of how do you get from marketing into responsible leadership?
I totally get why you think that they're two completely different things. But I remember being the head of marketing for a project. I was about 29 years old at the time. And I had a meeting with my boss, who was the CEO of the company. And it's like, there's a problem here. It's like, because a lot of companies use marketing as spin, but there's marketing as substance. And marketing has got to be a true reflection of what the company is about. So if a leader says the company promises to do A, B, C, then the marketing has got to reflect that. And what a company does in practice has also got to reflect that. Unfortunately, marketing has got a bad reputation, and rightly so, frankly. When, for instance, when you look at the sustainability space and you look at the amount of greenwashing, this is lying. But there is so it's good to understand the back end of marketing, to understand what's kind of the thinking of some people, because ultimately it's a mindset thing, it's a commitment thing, it's the people and the companies that you're representing, right? Yeah, so it wasn't such a leap for me, but yeah, a lot of people would see that as a leap.
Yeah, and that's not the usual, like normally people start in governance and law and end up in ethics, that's what I mean, and kind of starting from marketing is a little bit of an unusual path.
But the beauty with that is that it's not street, right? It's, if you really want to understand the ethics of data and AI, you have to understand the impact on the ground. You have to understand the impact of customers. And when you look at how AI is being deployed currently, a lot of it is to get more people to buy more stuff. When we think about the power of AI, I mean, this is child's play, but there's also a lot of, when I was, the project I mentioned when I was 29, so this is 20 years ago, it was a multi-complex. So there were shops, there were restaurants, and I was looking into the psychology of selling and the psychology of buying and patterns. And I wanted to have data so that we could customize offers to our customers versus sales that are pushing product that the retailer, for instance, no longer wants. And I was always thinking about increasing dwell time and optimizing the experience and really delivering true to the brand promise and the brand soul. And so I faced a lot of the issues around, okay, how do you collect the data and what's responsible to do with this and what's fair here and how do you work around this issue? And okay, I was a little bit ahead of the curve, probably, but I remember mobile phones had just come to the island. This was in Malta, and man, this thing just captured my imagination because you got this tiny little thing, but it's such a powerful tool. And every single day, I used to be on the phone with the mobile operators, like, okay, can I do this and can I do this and can I do this? And they would laugh at me. They're like, yeah, in 10 years' time. So I had come up with our own currency. I'd come up, can we use it to pay? Can we use it to have a loyalty program? Can we? So yeah, it was, so I understood how the technology worked because I was asking these questions. What a lot of people don't realize when they meet me is they assume I'm a human person, like, I'm touchy-feely and stuff. What they find very difficult to believe is that I started out when I was a kid. I actually wanted to be in accountancy. I love maths. I had the privilege of being exposed to an Apple computer when I was 9 years old. So I've had a very blessed and very charmed life and being exposed to a lot of different things. I was also raised in a multicultural environment. So I didn't see the world in terms of one particular color. I was exposed very early to lots of different cultures and lots of different religions and lots of different color. And I didn't, it wasn't about me being a girl that I couldn't be good at certain things. I wasn't programmed that way, and I'm really grateful for that. But today, looking back and listening to the noise in the world, wow, that's privilege. That's real privilege.
Yeah, we will come back to the diversity questions. I have several for you. Sure. But before we do that, for people who do not know your work, can you tell us if you had to pick one most important thing that you have done so far in your career, what would that be?
In my career, or with
Yeah, and
present.
just what is your biggest achievement? Not necessarily in career. Let's just be kind of
Yeah.
Let's just think in general.
I'm a bit weird. I'm never proud of myself. I'm never like, if I look back at stuff, if someone were to look at my life and career, I'm sure they'd say, you know, well, there's this and there's this and there's this. There's a very strange one, which always makes me, energizes me the most. Back when I was about 29, 30 is when 9/11 hit, and I was the head of marketing for this place. And this kind of also retackles the issue about marketing. And I had a couple of weeks after 9/11, one of the clients linked to the development was telling me that they had a challenge, that they had a Japanese prayer group that travels around the world planting a peace pole. And they wanted to do one in Malta, but you know they had to get all this red tape, so they had to go to the land department and the planning authority and et cetera, et cetera. This was a piece of wood that was this wide and about 6 feet tall. I mean, it's not. So I said, okay, don't worry, we will organize this. So between going from their office to my office, which is grand total about 20 or 30 minutes, I had this ecumenical service kind of imprinted in my mind, and I just wanted to bring all the religions together to have this peace pole planting session. And it went from half an hour to a week-long event on peace. And the beautiful thing about this is that everyone was aware of what was happening about 9/11, but no one was really aware about all the other atrocities that were happening in the world. So, and the way people just galvanized and came out of the woodwork, and it was with zero effort. Like it was from, I always hold it in my mind and my heart because it reminds me that this is possible. It was truly business as a force for good, where we got a lot of people to turn up. If we had to pay for all the media, it would have been around, I converted the other, about 250,000 euro, which is not bad for, you know, a week, 10 days. And it was really kind of a really good reflection. I remember my boss always used to say to me, this place is a space to raise awareness. And it's hard to do that and monetize. So there's lots of different ways of monetizing things. So it always kind of, I think I love that moment because it was ultimate collaboration. It's about touching people somewhere and getting them to take action. And this is a problem we have today, right? How do you get people? People know we have a problem in different areas, and yet we're not taking action. So I go back to that and I unpack it. I'm like, okay, what were the dynamics? What were the ingredients? What needs to happen? And trying to do that on a massive scale. So yeah, I hope
Awesome.
that.
Yeah, sounds impressive. I have my cheat sheet here. So I know that you on your LinkedIn it says that you work on intersection of humanity and technology, which I think is really cool. And I know you also work on AI ethics, and quite a few people who listen to this podcast or watch us on YouTube, they're really interested in AI ethics. So can you give some tips to people who are trying to get into this field, who are trying to learn more about AI ethics, how to better do that? So should they go and get a degree? Should they go to some webinars? Where should they start?
I think first they need to understand for what reason they want to be involved in it. Why does it matter? What's the hook for them? And once they understand the hook, then okay, well, in order to, and then just kind of reverse engineering that process. And reverse engineering the process is an extremely important skill to have, because ultimately everything's about decoding everything, right? And if you can't, I think there's too many people out there in love with technology without being able to step it back and bring it back into very simple terms and consequences. I always say to people, there are two careers that are guaranteed for the future. One is to be a white hat hacker, because there are always innocents in the system. So I think there will always be a call for them. And the other is in the field of law, to specialize in human rights, but in terms of data, privacy, technology. I mean, it's fascinating for me. I mean, it's, and just get curious, just look at people's profiles on LinkedIn, reach out to them, ask them questions, because sometimes we have this perception of something from the outside, but actually the reality on the ground is very, very different from our perception. So you need a reality check. It's good to volunteer for some stuff. If there's a project, actually, as I'm saying this, one of the things that I will aim to do is set out some challenges for people in order to help them experiment and help them clarify which parts of it they should explore better and pathways for the future. I'll do that. That's on my to-do list. Great question.
Awesome. And yeah, I'm definitely looking forward to the challenges. That'd be awesome to see. And I'm definitely going to be the one who will be, retweeting them and kind of inviting people to participate. That's always awesome. Yeah, and I completely agree with you that it's better to start doing something than to just, hear someone talk about it. That's for sure is a lot better strategy. So let's just come back to responsible leadership. And from your experience, and you have a long career already in responsible leadership, you described it, and you described how you got into it. So what do you think is the most important thing to remember when you work in responsible leadership? So like one thing you wish you knew when you started in this area.
Humility is a really important component. Mm-hmm. We're human beings and therefore prone to error. I think we live in a world where people get stuck behind a narrative and then they look at the world through that lens just to strengthen that narrative instead of challenging it. One of the reasons I managed to actually develop Amani was because I was petrified of getting things wrong. Mm-hmm. I'll give you a simple example. A lot of people say trust your intuition. So yes and no, because I mapped this when I was doing searches. So search is fascinating because when you reach out to someone, if you get a call from one of the biggest firms in the world, the person that they're speaking to is not you as a soul, so to speak, but your ego. So I had to figure out how to hack an ego. And so there was a particular script that I found was very, very effective, which is, I understand you're very happy and successful where you are, or people speak highly of you, or what have you, et cetera, but I'm curious, if there were a compelling scenario, what would that look like? Mm-hmm. And then listen. So humility, being petrified of getting something wrong, because it makes you look for data to prove yourself wrong. And this is the issue with the intuition piece, right? A lot of people say, I trust my intuition. So even, for instance, due diligence on startups, they say, my intuition says yes, and then they do due diligence. But the due diligence they do is to confirm their intuition. But this we have confirmation bias. So the due diligence actually needs to go out to prove their intuition wrong. And if the due diligence comes back as clear as well, so you green light on the intuition and green light on the due diligence, then you're safer to proceed. But this is the issue with people kind of going down this particular path. So humility, being petrified of getting it wrong, and going out to prove yourself wrong, because then you find either a better way of doing something, which is great, or more ways of strengthening your original thesis. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense. And actually, we had some discussions with colleagues about this in terms of, when you talk to kind of prospective students, normally the most empathetic people, they do not consider business careers, right? I mean, it's more kind of goal orientation, more of kind of, sometimes it's leadership in a good sense, but sometimes it's just kind of showing off and all that kind of stuff that goes into thinking that you could do the like MBA or some business degree. And for some reason, people who are more empathetic, they end up in other majors. Like, for example, they would end up, for example, in medical school, or end up doing a sociology degree or an art degree.
Psychology and business studies.
Yeah, but I mean, now like they have an opportunity to work. I know. So, for example, I know cybersecurity field quite well, and cybersecurity folks are really great at hiring. For example, I don't know, literature majors, which I think is great, but or linguistics majors, and now kind of linguistics and corpus linguistics is really kind of edging on AI and conversational AI, and so these guys are really great. But I'm always wondering why people who have this humility and humanity and empathy somehow think that, oh, I shouldn't be doing the business degree, I should be doing something else. So, so is that your experience, or am I wrong there?
So you bring up a really, really, really good point about, so going back to your previous question about what advice would you give to someone who's looking for that path? Mm-hmm. The other advice I would give is to hiring managers and business leaders, because a lot of them tend to be very myopic onto the criteria that they're looking for, mm-hmm. As opposed to reverse engineering the skill set and where are they going to find that balance of people. Mm-hmm. If you have a team that's full of techies, well, you need an empath in there in order to put the human perspective in, because it is the beauty is about technology working in harmony with humanity and serving humanity, and managing that very fine balance, I think, is really important. There's a lot of noise around general AI, and I'd started a book. And I woke up one morning and I realized it's like, because a lot of people, like, there's some that say it could take over humans, that it's bad, and others are saying it's amazing, it's the panacea. And I was like, wow, imagine one of the potential possibilities of the future is AI could be kinder to humans than humans are to humans. Mm-hmm. And that gave me such, I don't know, just really made me pause. And this is the thing, right? We need to make sure that we're not looking at the world through a 30-degree lens, but 360. Like, it's, I've spoken to people building AI platforms and they're values based, and I'm like, okay, well, whose values are you using? How are you building up that knowledge base? Oh, Western. Well, why? So we're already being exclusive in that way. So yeah, it's humans are an interesting problem. My mom used to say to me, when I criticize you, I don't criticize you. I criticize your behavior because you're better than your behavior. And for me, it's always the distinction between people and our behaviors and humanity and our potential. And I think that for me is the ultimate play for AI. It's about how do we set it up not to force people to be their best selves, but to create decision-making capabilities that help them understand the impact of their decisions and actions, because it's very difficult to make a sound decision these days. So I think, I'm very passionate about personal AI, which is one of the projects, but we'll touch upon that later. Mm-hmm.
So you obviously raised a lot of important points here, but I just want to kind of maybe stop on one of them, and that's the importance of responsible leadership for business. And we hear a lot about responsible leadership now, and there's like kind of a hype around this, and everybody wants to be responsible. I haven't met a single company that doesn't want to be responsible. But since you are working in this field, how do you think this thinking about responsible leadership and doing responsible leadership actually changed business in the last few years? So what changes did you observe in this field?
So in the beginning of COVID, I started out really hopeful. I thought, this is the disruption that the system requires in order for us to course correct.
Mm-hmm.
And as the weeks went past, I just sat back and just kind of scratched my head. It's like, we're not going to learn the lesson. And that worries me a lot, because I think we have a great opportunity. It's, look, one of the things that worries me about in this world, because you said, there's a lot of hype around responsible leadership. Yeah, there is. It drives me absolutely bananas. The last year, everyone's talking about purpose-led organizations. I'm just like, okay, well, actually, it's not. It's more than that. It's so in the model that we developed, there's the purpose, absolutely. Then there's the principles. So what do you stand for? It's kind of like the rules of the road. Then what are your practices? So it's about stepping things down. So, having a purpose is very, very lofty. It's basically, you've just reworded strategy, right? And your vision. And the principles are what every man and his dog talks about, which are values. But I find principles stronger and more, when we build them out, there's a set of questions that we ask, and we challenge the answers on lots of different scenarios. So we think through the what ifs. And then we look at, well, what does a company do in practice? And let me put it down for you in simple terms. So there was this early stage company, had a wonderful purpose. They wanted to sell water, and 10% of the top line goes to water projects in sub-Saharan Africa. And I've worked on water projects in sub-Saharan Africa, so it really touched kind of a point in me. So, and most people would say, oh, well done, that's brilliant, hurrah. But I started asking the deeper questions. It's like, okay, so what's the quality of the water? What's the source of the water? How sustainable is the water source? Do the people in the surrounding community have access to the water? You're shipping this water. How are you counteracting that? You're bottling this water in plastic. What are you doing to counteract that? And they looked at me and like, well, that's a lot of work. Like, well, but that's the game. So if you're going to play the game, know the rules properly. Yeah, you can't be a chess master if all you've ever played is, Connect Four or something.
Yeah, so we talked a lot about the importance of being responsible and importance of being ethical. And quite a few people that I teach, for example, in executive programs, they're also worried about their technical skills. So in your view, do you need these technical skills? Do you need an ability to code? Like, to what extent do you actually need these skills? So maybe they're completely not necessary. Maybe you just need to have some basic understanding of how things work. So in your view, is it important to go learn, I don't know, Python if you are working in, I don't know, at a C-level job?
Look, I'm very reticent of saying 0 and 1 answers, because everything does very much depend on the situation. But really,
yeah, of course it depends. Yeah.
I just have to have that caveat. But realistically and pragmatically, if you're a CEO, what are your main responsibilities? It's to make sure that the company is being run well, it's making money, and so you've got to reverse engineer that. It's like, okay, for this particular company, what does that look like? And then you determine the skills from there. Typically, a CEO doesn't need to have the technical skills, as long as he or she recognizes that they don't have them. They have the courage to hire geniuses that know their stuff. They have the courage to ask what they may think are simple, stupid questions for fear of looking stupid. And they need to trust them. You've got to have trust with this team, right? That they are delivering and they're being given the tools and the resources and the frameworks to deliver on the promise. Because this is another thing. We we set out with good intentions, but then we set up the game all wrong, you know? So, I mean, there's lots of examples in lots of different spheres, but does that answer your question?
Yes, yes. I think it does. Yes, and yeah, I think there is a lot. People tend to worry too much about that. To me, I think I always say that if you have a conceptual understanding of what is going on, that's important, because you need to understand that algorithms are only as good as the training sets that basically were used to set up these algorithms. So as long as you get that as a C-level executive, that's probably enough to understand that what you're looking at is not just truth.
Exactly. And
it's some version, right?
The good thing about having a non-techie as a CEO is they're a clean slate. So if they have the ability to listen and ask questions and cogitate, they end up being more like not a coach to the techies, but more as a North Star. But there needs to be this, amazing communication. The CEO needs to know how to bring the techies out of their heads. Needs to create a safe enough space for the techies to speak up and say, I'm worried about this and this and this and this. Okay, explain that to me. So it's more the environment of communication that I think is really critical.
I agree there with you. So I like how that's the folks who are not actually in the quantitative fields, they can think outside the box, and they have all this imagination added to technical expertise of the team. My worry sometimes is that people, this is my experience, so I don't have any, it's not representative sample. It's just kind of some random observations. But my feeling is that when people are not really trained in quantitative fields, they sometimes, I'm not saying always, but sometimes they tend to trust technology too much, because they think, okay, well, that's based on mathematics, that's based on gut feeling, and mathematics sounds like a legitimate thing to follow. And that's not always the right thing, because you can completely misrepresent data. You can train the algorithm based on completely wrong data set, and a lot of things can go wrong in data science. And data science is not such some sort of magic wand, but like I think a lot of people believe, like I'm amazed at the level of trust that goes on, and also I'm also amazed how we do not learn. Like we have one failed algorithm after the other, but we do not learn that we shouldn't trust the algorithm. So that amazes me. But I don't know. Maybe you obviously you talk to leaders a lot more than me. Do you feel that that's a problem, or do you think that they have some sort of natural barometer of this is good, this is bad?
So this is where, first of all, they don't know what they don't know. Some are taken in by anything sparkly. Mm-hmm. Stick the word AI on there and they'll buy it. So for instance, in the beginning of COVID, there was a piece of tech that was getting a lot of PR. And now look, I am not a techie nerd, but I have a brain, I'm curious, and when I smell something, I then reach out to trusted advisors and experts and say, okay, tell me, yay, nay, or like, am I reading into this too much? And they appreciate that, because at least, but this particular application had its home in recruiting. So when you talk to me about data in recruiting, I will be any techie hands down, because I understand what the process is and the human code. So the human, because everything is code, right? But this piece of tech, they were saying that they could help companies bring people back to work. They could determine they had COVID by the cough. It's like, okay, well, this is a lie. It's not true. There isn't enough data. And I had actually checked with MIT because they were, I'd looked into some papers they had issued. It's like, and some of the narratives at the time, some of the debates, and there wasn't enough data sets. Back to your point about, ultimately it's going to be fed data. And then, later on, they were talking about how many people are asymptomatic. It's like, why are you rushing? Why are you doing something that's irresponsible? So responsible leadership in that context is everyone who's fueling it. So it's the media companies that ran the piece, because as soon as something gets airtime, it's somehow subconsciously people believe there's been some kind of vetting. It's good enough for them, it's good enough for us. I've come across this with young global leaders of the World Economic Forum. I mean, they're massively unethical and they were lying. And I contacted the World Economic Forum. It's like, okay, what do you do if you come across someone who's one of your young global leaders and they're doing unethical stuff? No answer. But then I saw investors and pitches, and as soon as you say certain names, they're like, oh, that's good. You're being hacked. So I love looking at how humans are hacked. And so you're back to your original question. Unfortunately, a lot of people in C-suites are humans as well, and they can be hacked.
Mm-hmm. So I want to come back to your point about diversity now, and you mentioned, that your background kind of led you to appreciate different cultures and backgrounds and diversity in general. But I still think that we have very few women in. Maybe you disagree. There were some people on this on this podcast that disagreed with me, who said, I disagree with you. We have enough women. So yeah, I just feel we do not have enough women in STEM positions generally, but also not only in academia, but also in practice, so amongst practitioners. So do you what do you think are the underlying reasons? And here's a $1 million question: how do we deal with this? What do we need to do to overcome this problem?
Okay.
I'm also curious about your opinion as a female founder. I talked to several founders, and there are so few of them for some reason, and there are many women that I meet that have many ideas, but for some reason, not everyone actually takes their idea from idea to implementation. And I feel that guys do it a little bit more efficiently. Don't know why.
Well, so I'd really like to find a PhD student who's unpacking this, not just looking at the women, but looking at the men as well.
Yeah. So of course, we just take women as I just want to say to everyone listening to the podcast, I completely appreciate that there are other minorities and underrepresented groups. So we're just going to focus on one, here.
Well, the crazy thing is this. First of all, women are not a minority group. We are half of the global population.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yes.
So that always makes me laugh. So there was this panel, as you said in the beginning, I'm also a troublemaker. And the reason I'm a troublemaker is because I say the things that some people are thinking, but may not feel comfortable to say out loud. And I've started saying things out loud. And luckily I have my own platform. So that gives me freedom. I still need to be cognizant of certain environments where I operate, and ultimately I need to bring people with me. But there was this panel discussing the future. I think it was technology in the future. And the fascinating thing for me is all the panelists were men. And so I put this comment on there. It's like, are there no women in the future? Now, I'm not saying that, just because you're a woman, you should have a seat at every single table. But I think there needs to be more we need to hack laziness, right? It's very easy to, you're putting something together. Who do we know? Who do we know? Who do we know? And typically, it's a bunch of men. Now, to the data side of it, when I was working in executive search, the majority of people on the shortlist were men, because the majority of people in those roles were men. And I used to scan over 100 companies for every assignment. Okay, so the issue is not the leadership roles. The issue is the pipeline. Mm-hmm. Why are women dropping off? And there are nuances to this. So I actually developed an audit, specific questions for an audit for people to both companies and for individuals to figure out, okay, why is this happening? So I'll post it. I'll share it. I'll send it to you.
Awesome. Thank you.
I need to, at the moment it's just paper. So
no worries. But whenever you're ready, no rush.
Right. I have like my own language. I'm a Webster. I'm allowed to make up words. So it's a pipeline issue. So how many, are there, if we look at university, how many women are doing that particular course, but it's not enough. It's about their aspirations. And so there's some little stories that I'll share just to capture the audience's imagination, to not take this thing so much for granted, because I never thought I'd be discussing gender stuff. It drives me bananas, to be honest. But it's also frustrating to always hear the same voices. And
I have actually maybe to add to your story storybook. One of the most fascinating stories I heard about, underrepresentation of women was actually the story of Liechtenstein, which was a country that was one of the latest to pass a law about women being able to vote. I mean, it was not until like late 20th century. So whereas like everyone pretty much got the right to vote at the beginning of 20th century in Europe, Liechtenstein was a country in the middle of Europe where women, I don't want to lie, but I think it's like 1980s when women got, or even 1990s when they got the rights. And it was basically like this. So the European Union started to form, and they were saying, oh, look, we have this country in the middle of Europe that has this very strange system where women cannot vote and or be voted. Basically, the problem was that, of course, every year, Liechtenstein would put out a referendum, right? But only men could vote in that referendum. So naturally, no one was voting for this. So yeah, I mean, this is essentially this is the story, exactly what you're saying. That I mean, there was basically no. It's a process. Yeah, it's a process problem. So the processes were such that you couldn't actually get that done. So only with a lot of pressure from European Union, they eventually kind of voted for this. But it's amazing. I find that fascinating.
Yeah, we do take a lot of things for granted in this world. I was speaking to my husband and I were in the States, was it 2 years ago, a year and a half ago, and we went to this dude ranch, and the people who own it and run it are ex-nuclear engineers, husband and wife team, phenomenal. Mm-hmm. And I was asking her about her view on STEM. I mean, she's an engineer, so she's far better equipped to have a view of, why there aren't enough women in STEM. And she said something which was brilliant. Don't discourage us. And I thought that was so important, because there's all this noise around mentors and encouraging and empowering, etc. But actually, there is a girl or there is a boy and they aspire to do something and they say it as a wish. There's always someone around who'll bat them down, like, your feet on the ground. And no, actually, that's discouraging. So stop doing that. There was I was at this mentoring, huge mentoring event where all these young girls come from schools and there was all these women in business who are giving them they're 2 pennies worth. And I was watching and listening to the mentors with these girls. And I was like, this is what's wrong with the system. So they were asking, because it's the power of the questions, but it's also you need to challenge. So it's not about a mentor. You need someone who champions you, challenges you, and it's a catalyst for you. So they would ask a young girl, so what do you want to do when you're older? And this young girl, for instance, would say, oh, I want to be an accountant. I go, oh, very good. And they'd just carry on chatting. Well, what I did is like, oh, wow, that's cool. Why? Okay. I said, have you heard of a chief financial officer? Have you heard of a CFO? And so then I explain the CEO and the CFO, and you capture their imagination. If they haven't been exposed, they won't know. And the same holds true for boys as well. So because there's one of the problems with leadership is a lot of people have this preconceived notion and this bias that the best leaders are extroverts, and actually they're not. But there's this, propensity to like extroverts more. But from an impact perspective and effectiveness, the betas are, from the research I did and the work that I've done, the betas are more to the quiet, considered ones are more impactful and more successful in building a team and a company than the alphas, because alphas tend to be more, and this is, it doesn't, and again, we have to be very, very, very careful when we say these things, because every person is unique. And just because certain models say one thing, it's more important to understand the questions you should be asking and make sure that you are giving everyone the best stab at something without your own filters going on.
Well, while you were talking, actually I looked it up. So the women got the right to vote in Liechtenstein in 1984. 1984. So that's just amazing. Absolutely amazing fact. Okay, so you also touched on COVID, and I want to come back to that point as well. And you said how we're probably missing the opportunities here, that, we were given this chance and we're not really using it. So what role do you think responsible leadership plays in helping the situation? Is it because, let me just give you maybe a specific example. So if we take British political leadership, right? Political leadership, we had so much, I think, lack of direction there. So at the beginning, there was one opinion that we all should get, I don't know, herd immunity. Then, the scientific evidence came along, and then, there was a completely different view that we should not get herd immunity, we should actually self-isolate. So, so that's kind of British example. We can also talk about American example, which was another way of dealing with this situation. And then there were countries like Germany that were saying, well, testing from the beginning, and kind of taking the scientific evidence and trying to minimize risk for everyone. So it would seem that we have incredible heterogeneity here in terms of, responsibility and, in relation to COVID. So does that add to solution, or does that add to a problem in your view? So should everyone, if every single country had exactly the same way of dealing with COVID, same responsible way of dealing with COVID, do you think we would have all been better off, or is diversity actually good? That's kind of...
Contrary to popular belief, I do not have a crystal ball.
No. I mean, I appreciate that. Yeah. So it's obviously we're talking about your opinion, your expert opinion, but nevertheless. Yeah.
So, look, I did first lockdown in the UAE, and I did the second lockdown in the UK. So it's been really interesting to do a compare and contrast of how democracies operate. And, it's very easy to point the finger and criticize appointed leaders, ones that we have voted in. But this is what I find fascinating about the British population. So let's unpack the UK system first.
Yeah.
We need to recognize that the British population voted in the current government.
Mm-hmm.
Current government also needs to recognize that they are employed by the British people, and therefore you need to answer questions truthfully. You can't, and that's one thing I've been studying the speeches and the narratives, and there's so much deflection. And unfortunately, what happens is they irritate the British public, and it has knock-on effects. But from a implementation perspective, so I connect dots. I've done it since I was a kid. I'm a bit obsessive about it. So I flew from France to the UK, and at the time, France and a few other countries had just been put on the quarantine list, and I was flying through Heathrow. The bus, they actually put us onto a bus to the main terminal. And I spoke to one of the ground staff. I was like, what's up with this? Because you couldn't even have 1 meter distance. And he's like, I know, we have told top management, but they're not listening to us. So that's an example of responsible leadership. Listen to the front line. When we got to the terminal, I was looking around. It's like, there are flights here from other countries that are not on the quarantine list. There was a very, very long queue in the passports area. So different people from different flights could actually be exposed to each other. Furthermore, everyone was looking down at their phone, not observing the stickers that were very clearly on the ground. And when I asked people to keep 2 meters apart, I actually got abused. This, and the other narrative that annoys me is that, men are bad and women are better. And actually that's not true at all. The number of people I observed wearing masks in France, for instance, majority, there were less women wearing them than men. Maybe they were worried about smudging their lipstick. I'm not quite sure. I saw a similar thing in the UK. In leadership, it's a personal responsibility thing. It's liberty versus license. It's, wearing a mask is not an infringement of human rights. And someone like Elon Musk, who should know better than to tweet that because of his level of influence. And for me, if you have influence, you should also be a leader. But unfortunately, we haven't seemed to connected the two. It's actually a sign of compassion. It's a sign of caring for others. And I've gone completely off the question and off the topic. But it's these tiny little things. It's very easy to point the finger at others when we need to look at ourselves and saying, well, am I doing the very, very, very best?
Don't get me wrong. I completely agree with you that it's easy to be smart exposed, right? And that's not what I was kind of trying to get at. Basically, the problem, the way I see it, I mean, I'm not an expert in responsible leadership, but it seems that the way countries were quite consistent in the way they thought about the problem. And there were also countries who were completely inconsistent. And one of such countries, in my view, I mean, it's just, again, I don't have a full picture here. In my view, UK is one of the countries that was not very consistent because the leadership was saying one thing and then, and it is a difficult situation. There's no doubt about it. And, we don't know how we would be, like, I don't know how I would behave, right? And in similar circumstances. And obviously, like, that's true. We need to acknowledge that that's a difficult problem. But
let's look at the alternative. If in this particular case, the British government had set out with one particular direction, and as new data came in, they said, we're not going to course correct because this is what we've said. Well, that's stupid.
Yes, right. I agree. So
they have flipped back and forth, yes. Have they done it in a logical way and in a transparent way? No. And they definitely haven't been consistent. So totally with you there. From a global perspective, I think there is leadership lacking globally.
Yeah.
If COVID has taught us anything, is that this beautiful planet is a very interconnected system. And whilst we may not have been impacted by the first SARS, China obviously knew how to handle it far better. Instead, we went on the attack, pointing the finger, as opposed to, okay, give us the tips. What can we learn from the past so that we can, because no country in the world had any immunity from a knowledge perspective, right? There's a physical immunity, but it's the knowledge. We had no experience in this per se. And also before COVID, I think that's where the irresponsible leadership came in, where the likelihood of a pandemic was always on the cards. It was not a black swan, as some people liked to say. Even Nicholas Taleb, who wrote Black Swan, got very irritated when it was called the Black Swan, and it's also not unprecedented. It was a high probable event. So the fact that there was no preparation beforehand, I think, is the height of a responsibility for every single government around the world. As soon as it hit, I think there should have been a more cohesive strategy and plan. So there could have been agreement, for instance, that some countries take one direction and other countries take another direction, so that we've got different sources of data and we can test effectiveness, but we're all in it together. That is truly all in it together. But it would be interesting to go through all the scenario mapping that was carried out before the pandemic and see how much of it actually was done in reality.
I was going to ask you separately about challenges for responsible leadership and the future, but maybe I could combine that into one question and just ask you, going forward, what do you think are the biggest challenges and the biggest opportunities that responsible leadership offers? So in the next 5 years, where could it get us?
I think we need to look beyond 5 years.
Yeah, let's look as far as we can.
I think we need to look at. So we've already learned, except for we haven't learned, that previous generations and our generation has left a terrible situation from an environmental perspective for future generations. We did the same thing from a financial perspective, and we're also going to do a similar thing from a data perspective. We seem to not learn lessons. So I think the responsible thing to do is we need to challenge every single system that we have in place, and we need to have the courage to course correct. So, when people like Larry Fink, who's the CEO of BlackRock, speak up and say, we need to implement stakeholder capitalism, yes, I totally agree with that. 183 companies fellow CEOs signed up to that promise. But then it's what you do in practice. And so on a day-to-day basis, you've got to we have the competence, but do we have the commitment? Do we have the follow-through? There's no point in having these lofty ideals and recognizing a problem if we don't then follow through in, for instance, the way we vote or in what we back, what we invest in. And I think so I did a really interesting project going to different universities and listening to what the next generation truly want. This was a couple of years ago. It happened to coincide with the Cambridge Analytica debacle with Facebook. What I found interesting is these kids didn't know what was happening with Cambridge Analytica. Number one. Number two, these kids.
Very few actually. I can tell you, I teach that, and very few people actually know exactly what happened. So they all heard about Cambridge Analytica, but no one understands why this. What is the exact issue there?
So we need to break it down further for them, because in the meantime, big companies are justifying their actions, saying because people are okay with it. Well, people don't actually know. It's kind of like saying people are okay buying cigarettes because back then they didn't know it caused cancer. And it was perceived as cool. So, yeah, I just we can do better. There's a few little party things, little fun things everyone can do, even in our social distancing world and Zoom landscape. One is you gather a group of people and you go around in a circle and you grade how we're doing currently. And it was fascinating. I did this with one group of people, and the mix of, there were some people in finance, there were some people in family businesses. The first guy started out as an A. But he was a hedge fund manager and was just in the process of moving to Silicon Valley. This was a couple of years ago. The next one gave it a B. She was in finance. She was based in New York. Then the next person was someone who is the second gen in a family business in Brazil, and he decided to grade the world a D. And then the last person said, well, I was going to start with an A, but actually listening to everyone now and your reasons for your grades, I'm now going to give it a C. Because this is the thing about technology, you know, we have so many fascinating problems to solve on this planet. You know, is the solution going to Mars? Well, no, frankly, because the next thing that's going to happen is you're probably going to have some alien species arrive and they're going to stop us and say, you know what, you screwed up your planet, you're not going to go and screw up another one. Prove to be responsible with this one, and then maybe we'll talk. And then, you know, the media will jump on and they'll say it's an unprecedented event, because that's what we like to do. Sorry, I'm being tongue in cheek, but it's, you know, I don't have kids, but ever since I was little, I always, you know, when I used to, I don't know, I just always said I want to leave the world a better place than the way I was given it. Are certain things better? Yes, but given the resources and technology and the brains that we have, good Lord, we could be doing a lot more. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. I don't think it's time to pat ourselves on the back until every single person on this planet has access to clean water, until every single child has access to school. Only then can we pat ourselves on the back, and then it will be well deserved.
Well, there you go. Great advice from Deborah Webster there about, you know, being proactive. I think it's very important, and given it a maximum, you know, just in terms of responsibility and in terms of what we could achieve. That'd be great. So I have several kind of final questions for you that I normally ask at the end. So the first traditional question is, can you tell us what you're currently working on? What keeps you awake at night? What makes you excited?
What keeps me awake at night is how to get people to convert their talk to action. Mm-hmm. I'm also supposed to be writing some stuff, but it's, you know, there's so much noise in the world. I wonder if it's worth it. So I'm actually writing a cute book at the moment. It's fun. It's very short, so people can dip into it. It's different perspectives, and it's different drawing comparisons to things. Do you know anyone who goes to, personally I hate buffets, but a lot of people go to buffets, they love them, they overindulge, and the same thing can be said about how we've treated the resources on this planet. Earth has given us a buffet, abundance of resources, and we have treated it with a gluttony that we adapt to, that we deploy when we're eating at a buffet. So the question to people is, how would it impact your decisions in your business or your day-to-day life if you had a set menu or a la carte, and you're allowed a starter, a main course, and some dessert, because everyone likes a bit of sweetness in their life. So it's funny, goofy little things like that. I think people need something lighthearted as well as impactful.
Awesome. Yeah, sounds exciting.
And there's one project which is on the horizon, which is in the personal AI space, which excites me to no end. So yeah, that would be a project worth doing. Let's see.
Awesome. Sounds good. We usually have quite a few requests for books and films and various recommendations. So again, traditional questions at the end. If I asked you to recommend, and it's a trick question, this is a question that everyone complains about, I have to say. If I asked you to recommend one book and one film, and you have to choose just one of each, what would your recommendations be?
Very easy. The book,
Cool.
The Age of Surveillance Capitalism, is a must-read for everyone. Brilliant book. And the movie is A Life on Our Planet by Sir David Attenborough.
Awesome. Yes, fantastic choices. And so this is a traditional question that I also ask this year, and that's the last question, I promise. And the question is, this question is about your favorite fictional character. Who's your favorite fiction character?
Gosh, I'm going to be kind of cheesy, and I'm going to say Wonder Woman.
Awesome. Great choice. Awesome. Yeah. Thank you so much, Deborah. So this was Deborah Webster with us. And if I had to summarize today's chat, I think one thing I learned from this is, very often we kind of, when we form organizations and kind of think about our ideas, we kind of have this, it's like we're in a, just to twist your analogy a little bit about the buffet, we're like in a frozen yogurt shop, right? And we're kind of trying to add everything to one bowl. But Deborah taught us today that we always have to remember to put a little bit of, or a lot of responsible leadership on top. And these are the things that we normally forget. That's the ingredient that we often forget. And so we shouldn't forget it, and we should really work more towards building more responsible, sustainable, green, and inclusive future. Thanks so much.
Well, what's cool about responsible leadership? It doesn't sit just with the C-suite. It sits with every single one of us. So every single person in an organization is untapped gold. And people go into companies as good people. We need to make sure we're not creating the circumstances to corrupt them, to make them do less than they're capable of.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Deborah. Thanks for talking to me. And good luck. I'm looking forward to challenges, and I'm looking forward to the stories. And generally, there will be links to Deborah's Deborah's profile and to her web projects. So please do check out the description underneath the YouTube video. And thanks again, Deborah. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.